I'm going to share a story that still keeps me awake at night. And the most terrifying part? It happened just a few miles from where I lived. The year was 2008. Summertime in Florida. A type of heat that clings on your skin long after the sun has set, making the night air heavy and nearly suffocating. People in places like these slept with box fans going in their windows, cicadas buzzing in the distance, and the odd sound of a car rumbling down the silent, palm-lined streets. The neighborhood took pride in its safety. Doors were not usually locked. Neighbors waved while watering their lawns. Families knew each other well enough to borrow sugar, ask for help to moving furniture, and drop in unannounced. But what transpired inside one modest, single-story home caught everyone off guard. Before we go into Amanda's narrative, I need to ask you a question. If you've been following along thus far, taking in every detail and feeling even a fraction of the terror and suspense, consider this. There are countless of tales like Amanda's out there, and so many of them go untold. By like and subscribing, you are helping to guarantee that tales like hers are remembered, that their voices are not lost to time, and that justice, awareness, and truth reach a wider audience. If you've been following this story attentively, do the right thing and subscribe immediately. Stay with us as we reveal every horrific detail. Otherwise, someone may forget to stand out for the next victim. Amanda Lewis was 25. She had spent her whole life in Florida, immersed in a sense of familiarity that made her both comfortable and restless. People who knew her characterized her as trustworthy, the sort that never let arrangements fall through and always arrived on time. Her automobile was usually neatly parked on the driveway. Her phone is typically on the countertop. Her handbag is beside the entrance. She thrived on routines, predictability. That's why, on July 13th, when her parents arrived and saw her car still parked in the driveway, something seemed off. At first, it was only a glimmer of anxiety. Maybe she'd overslept. Perhaps she had been out late and slept at a friend's apartment. But when her father stepped up the front steps, the flash of dread grew into something more serious. The door was unlocked. Inside, the home was silent. Not the stillness that indicated someone was sleeping, but the empty type, as if on stage before the players returned. Her father called her name once, twice. No answer. And then he noticed it. Her phone was resting on the counter. Her keys. Her wallet. Amanda had never left anything behind, and everything was right there in plain sight. But Amanda wasn't. He checked each room. The bedroom. The bathroom. Even the backyard, as if she had gone outside for fresh air. Nothing. No note. There is no evidence of struggle. There are no toppled lamps or smashed glasses. Just an absence. The dread had already set in when her parents contacted the police. Something was not right. This was not Amanda's style. When investigators arrived, they were also astonished by how little there was to work with. The residence was not ransacked. There were no muddy tracks or fingerprints that did not belong. There are no busted windows or locks. If Amanda had departed, she had not brought anything with her. If she had been abducted, the person had left nothing behind. It was as if she had disappeared in the middle of a normal night. The inquiry began like they all do, with questions. Where was she last seen? Who had she talked with? Did she have issues at work, in her personal life, or with anyone in town? But with each query, the responses merely added to the enigma. Friends stated that she was okay. Her family stated that she was happy. No one could explain why she would leave her life, let alone leave all she owned in the house. In tiny villages, news spreads more quickly than official reporting. Amanda's face had appeared on gas station flyers within hours. The cafe along the freeway had posted one to their door. Neighbors gathered in groups on front lawns, talking and wondering whether anything like this could actually happen here. And the murmurs all revolved around the same thought. If Amanda didn't leave on her own volition, someone must have been waiting for her. That night, volunteers explored the area with torches, cutting through retention ponds, fields, and forested sections on the outskirts of town. Dogs were brought in, and they picked up a few scents, but nothing that went somewhere substantial. Helicopters flew overhead, searching the ground with bright searchlights. However, Amanda did not appear as the hours and days passed. People were consumed by their lack of knowledge, because the house, car, and possessions all pointed to her not having planned this disappearance. Amanda did not choose to be involved in whatever occurred. Detectives attended news briefings, standing stiff in front of cameras, trying to strike a balance between cautious optimism and the dismal reality of the situation. They informed the community that they were working ceaselessly. They invited anyone with information to come forward. But, behind closed doors, they revealed something chilling. They had no leads. Weeks became months. Amanda's case cooled, despite her family's refusal to let her memory fade. They staged vigils, lit candles, and prayed aloud in the same neighborhood that was previously considered secure. Her mother would sit at the kitchen table at night, peering at the door, half expecting Amanda to stroll in as if nothing had happened. But everyone knew. People don't just vanish. Not without cause. Not without someone else's hand dragging them into the darkness. And that's what made Amanda Lewis' case so terrifying. Not only was she missing, but whomever was to blame was still alive. Still walking through the same neighborhoods, businesses, and streets, her face staring back at every missing poster. The officers kept asking the same questions. Who would want to hurt Amanda? Who was close enough to her to stroll into that house, lock the door, and leave no trace? The frightening aspect of this narrative is that the solution was not buried in some enigmatic stranger or faceless predator. No, Amanda's experience was much closer and more typical. And that's what makes this narrative so disturbing. Because in a town like this, where everyone thinks they know everyone else, the stranger observing from across the street may not be the most dangerous person you know. It may be the person you previously loved. Amanda Lewis was unprepared for what happened. When someone disappears, the first 48 hours are everything. But in Amanda's case, those hours ticked away with nothing but silence. The police presence surrounding Amanda's house increased rapidly. The narrow driveway was sealed off with crime scene tape. Officers stood watch at the front entrance as investigators walked in and out with files, cameras, and little plastic bags. Neighbors gathered across the street, murmuring in the scorching July heat, their gazes darting to every movement, as if someone might slip up and betray what had occurred. But the fact was simple. The investigators have nothing. There was no forceful entrance. There are no missing valuables. There's no struggle. And that absence served as proof in and of itself. Whoever was responsible for Amanda's disappearance did not break in. They did not break windows or kick down doors. No one noticed headlights speeding away into the darkness, and no one heard a scream. Amanda appeared to have walked out of her life freely, but she had left behind everything. Her automobile remained unchanged in the driveway, still glistening in the light. Her handbag, which contained her wallet, was on the kitchen counter. Her phone, her lifeline, was still connected to its charger. Even the bed appeared as if she had gone out for a drink of water and never returned. That's what bothered the investigators the most. If Amanda had chosen to depart, why would she forsake the necessities? Why depart without telling a single buddy or changing clothes? It did not add up. And when something doesn't line up in a missing persons case, police realize they're dealing with more than just a runaway. The sheriff's department went public shortly. Local news stations interrupted regular programming to show Amanda's face on TV screens across Florida. Reporters were outside her house, microphones in hand, their voices quiet and serious. Amanda Lewis, 25 years old, described as 5'7" with black hair and brown eyes, has not been seen since the evening of July 12th. Her family is appealing for answers. Amanda's mother stood near the reporters, her hands quivering as she held a photo of her daughter. Her voice trembled as she asked for assistance. Please, if anyone knows anything at all, come forward. My kid wouldn't just walk away. Someone out there knows what happened to her. The community reacted swiftly. Flyers were posted in petrol stations, supermarkets, and on light posts along the roadway. Vigils were held. Volunteers scoured the neighboring forests, examined drainage ditches, and walked for miles with spotlights piercing the steamy night air. However, every lead was dead-end. Detectives investigated her phone records, finding no strange calls that night. They reviewed her bank accounts, and there were no withdrawals or transactions. They questioned friends, co-workers, and neighbors. Everyone agreed. Amanda was not the sort to disappear. And that's what made things worse. Because when someone like Amanda goes missing, scrutiny turns inward, toward those closest to her. Detectives discreetly examined family members, as they normally do. Parents, siblings, friends. None of it fit. They had nothing but sadness and terror. No reason, no gain. But as the weeks passed into months, mistrust crept beyond the family. Whispers spread across town about an old boyfriend who hadn't handled the breakup well. Someone who remained on the periphery of her existence. However, there was little evidence to link him to her disappearance. No proof, confession, or evidence left behind. So the murmurs remained whispers. By the fall of 2008, Amanda's case had gone cold. The evening news stopped providing updates. Reporters left the home. Even the flyers, which were originally brilliant with new ink, began to fade beneath the unrelenting Florida heat. People still remembered, of course. They talked about Amanda in church, at the diner, and at the supermarket. However, the story no longer dominated the news. It had become a part of the town's discomfort, the type of memory you kept but never mentioned aloud until someone asked. Her family has never given up. They hold vigils every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. They lighted candles, raised her image, and reminded the world that Amanda was not forgotten. Her mother's voice grew weaker with each passing year, but it constantly returned to the same plea. Someone out there knows. Someone saw something. Please tell us. Detectives went in and out of the investigation, rereading the same files and repeating their steps in the hopes that a detail had been overlooked. But time simply made the path deeper. However, something about Amanda's situation never felt right. Something was gnawing at the investigators, who couldn't put it down. Because disappearances like these do not occur in a vacuum. They cannot occur unless someone initiates them. The truth was not concealed in a remote location or obscured by layers of mystery. It was close, much closer than anybody wanted to accept. And while Amanda's name faded from the front pages over the years, the person responsible continued to roam freely through the streets, shopping in the same stores. I passed the same neighbors who were still whispering about her. The most terrifying aspect of Amanda Lewis' absence was not simply that she was gone. It was the answer to everyone's question. Who took her? Was always directly in front of them. They just didn't see it yet. To comprehend what was lost when Amanda Lewis vanished, you must first grasp who she truly was. Not just the name on the flyers, not just the face on the evening news, but the life she led before everything was ripped away. Amanda Lewis grew up in northern Florida, in a community characterized by calm backroads with Spanish moss rather than frenetic city lights. Her youth was typical for a region like that. Summers spent running barefoot over grass still moist from afternoon rains, and winters where the only chill came from the north wind blowing through the pines. She was the middle kid of three. Her mother, Susan, worked at a neighborhood clinic where everyone knew one another's first names. Her father, Richard, was a carpenter, solid and soft-spoken, the type of man who mended things before you knew they were broken. Amanda inherited both of her parents' traits, her mother's sensitivity and her father's calm drive. Her siblings recalled her as the bridge in the family. She was the one who settled conflicts, reminded her younger brother to call home while he was away at college, planned birthday parties, and ensured that no one missed anniversaries. Amanda served as the Lewis family's glue. She enjoyed the simple pleasures in life, such as fresh oranges from the roadside stand, languid afternoons on the beach with her pals, and the sound of rain beating against her parents' tin porch roof. She wasn't pursuing a big, flashy life in the city. She was pleased here, with her family and friends, her consistent employment, and the familiar streets she had known since she was a child. Amanda was 25 years old in 2008. She worked as a receptionist for a small legal firm in downtown. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was ideal for her. She liked the rhythm of it, answering phones, welcoming customers, and keeping the office organized while the attorneys were rushing in a dozen different ways at once. She was reliable, and her supervisors trusted her with everything. Outside of work, she was just as reliable. Friends described her as someone who always answered the phone, even if it was late. Amanda was always willing to provide a ride to anyone who needed it. If a buddy suffered through a breakup, Amanda was there with coffee and a sympathetic ear. Her co-workers jokingly referred to her as an old soul, someone knowledgeable beyond her years who avoided conflict. But Amanda still had that spark. She liked music, dancing at the local pub on weekends, and she had a laugh that could be heard across the room. She was, in every way, unremarkable. And this is what makes her story so terrifying. Because Amanda could have been anyone. Her family characterized her as cautious. She kept her doors secured, checked on her parents on a frequent basis, and was not careless. She wasn't the kind to go without saying anything, and she certainly didn't welcome danger into her life. However, danger does not always appear out of nowhere. Sometimes it resembles someone you previously trusted, someone who knows how to slip through the crevices in your life undetected. Amanda had been trying to start fresh the year before her disappearance, according to friends. She had left a toxic relationship that had left her exhausted and wary. But she was powerful. She told everyone she was ready to move on, to focus on herself, and to enjoy the uncomplicated bliss she had created in her small part of Florida. Amanda was closer to her mother, Susan, than anybody else. They talked practically every day, sometimes about serious matters, sometimes about nothing at all, what she had for supper, the weather, how work was going. Susan identified Amanda as her dearest friend, as well as her daughter. That's why when Amanda didn't answer her phone that July morning, Susan's chest clenched with an unexplainable emotion. Her father, Richard, had the same reaction when he arrived and found the automobile still parked in the driveway. He had raised Amanda to be responsible and loyal. That automobile represented her independence, her commute to work, and her lifeline. If it was sitting there, Amanda should have been behind the wheel. But she wasn't. And it is the element that bothers her family the most. Amanda wasn't only missing from her house, but from every aspect of her existence. A life she had painstakingly established, surrounded by the people she loved, was abruptly cut short with no reason. When people saw Amanda's photo on those missing posters, her lovely smile, her eyes that seemed to hold both kindness and calm strength, they weren't looking at another case file. They were gazing at a daughter who never skipped Sunday supper, a sister who remembers each birthday, a buddy who always phoned back. She belonged in that place and with those people. And when she went, Amanda wasn't the only one who was lost. It was the illusion of safety, that nothing awful had happened here. Because if Amanda Lewis, a young lady with no enemies, no double life, and no need to go, can disappear, so can anyone. That was the belief that began to spread around the neighborhood in the days after her abduction. And it's an idea that persists today. When individuals go missing, detectives invariably return to one area: relationships. Who they cherished. They trusted who. Who could have had a reason to cling on even after the relationship ended. For Amanda Lewis, that person was Tyler Grant. On the surface, Tyler was the kind of man people described as charming. He was tall, carried himself with confidence, and had that easy smile that could win over a room. Tyler worked construction, sometimes bouncing between jobs, the kind of man who always had a tan from long hours in the Florida sun. To someone meeting him for the first time, he appeared grounded, hardworking, and possibly even dependable. Amanda met him through friends at a barbecue one summer. He wasn't flashy, but he knew how to make people laugh, and he made Amanda feel important in ways she hadn't before. He opened doors for her, texted her good mornings, and showed up with small gestures, flowers from the grocery store, a coffee when she was tired after work. Amanda wasn't someone who fell for big phrases, but Tyler wasn't showy either. Her friends reported she appeared lighter at first, almost shocked by the attention. He played it steadily, with just enough charm to feel reassuring. However, when charm is stretched too thin, cracks appear. Tyler had a temper, but it wasn't the kind that erupted in public. It was quieter, sharper, and always in private. A cold silence when Amanda said something he didn't like, a biting remark if she laughed too much with someone else at a party, and subtle comments about her clothes, friends, and how she spent her time. Tyler didn't like the concept of Amanda having aspects of her life that he couldn't get to. Her friends subsequently used the word controlling to describe her. It wasn't obvious at first, but it became plain with time. At first, Amanda brushed it off, telling her mother he was just protective, and telling her friends he meant well. That's how control frequently works. It disguises itself as caring, and Amanda, as kind-hearted as she was, wanted to think that was all it was. But the fractures grew. He began showing up unannounced, sometimes at her work, sometimes at her house. He'd act as if it was a sweet surprise, but his eyes scanned the room, taking in where she was and who she was with. If she didn't answer his calls right away, the texts came fast and furious. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? Who are you with?" Friends saw her withdrawing, not from them, but from sharing. She stopped talking about her difficulties with Tyler and bringing him up in casual conversation. When asked, she'd pretend it wasn't a big issue and that everything was okay. However, they weren't. Amanda stopped it in the spring of 2008. To her, it was like taking a breath after holding it for too long. She told her mother she just wanted space, to focus on herself, and for the first time in months, she appeared lighter, smiling more easily and laughing without hesitation. However, Tyler's story did not end there. He didn't see the split as the end of the relationship. Rather, he saw it as a stop, a mistake Amanda would realize and recover from. He continued to show up, phone, and find ways to be a part of her life, telling others that they were still working things out. Amanda had no idea how deep Tyler's passion was, and neither did any of her friends. He wasn't just keeping an eye on Amanda's life. He was calculating. He knew when her car left for work, when it returned, and when her lights turned off at night. He knew the rhythms of Amanda's world and built his own movements around them. The control he formerly attempted to maintain within the relationship was now outside of it. And Amanda never saw the whole breadth of it. She saw the frustration, the persistence, the persistent reaching out, but she didn't comprehend what it meant. Tyler wasn't just unwilling to let go. He was incapable. Behind the charm, behind the grin, was a guy who could not bear the thought of being left behind. Tyler Grant was more than simply a chapter in Amanda's history. He was a storm brewing on the outskirts of her life, ready to strike. Her family, friends, and even Amanda herself had no idea. And when Amanda went missing that July night, the name Tyler kept coming up in murmurs and half-formed accusations. But without proof, suspicion is only air, and Tyler understood how to remain smiling, how to stand with the family during vigils, and how to join the searches with a flashlight in hand, seeming to believe she'd be discovered. It was almost convincing, because, in the years that followed, investigators discovered what Amanda never saw. Tyler's charm was nothing more than a facade, and behind it was someone far more capable than anyone could have guessed. You know how sometimes your instincts just won't let you relax? That quiet little alarm bell in the back of your mind that screams, something's not right here, even when you can't prove it. That's where Amanda Lewis found herself in the months following her breakup with Tyler Grant. She was trying to move forward. Her friends later said she felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off her. She spent more time with her family, worked extra shifts at her job, and even considered returning to school. But underneath it all, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always watching her. It started small, with missed calls at odd hours. She'd look at her phone and see the number pop up, one she didn't recognize. At first, she brushed it off, Wrong numbers happen. People dial late. No big deal. But when it happened back to back, sometimes in the dead of night, it became more difficult to ignore. Her friends recall her telling them about it. It's weird, she said. They never leave a voicemail. They just hang up. Over and over. And then there was the car. A dark-colored sedan she'd seen parked across the street from her house more than once. It wasn't every night, not enough to think it was obvious stalking, but just enough to feel like more than coincidence. One night, she caught it in her rearview mirror, trailing her for a few blocks on her way home, and by the time she turned onto her street, the car had vanished. Amanda mentioned it to her mother, half joking but with a nervous edge in her voice, and her mother tried to reassure her. Maybe it was just a neighbor's visitor or someone lost in the area. Amanda nodded, but that didn't explain why it happened more than once, or why her phone kept ringing with strange calls. Tyler Grant had always been the type who couldn't take no for an answer. When she first broke things off, he didn't yell or throw a fit. Instead, he smiled, said he understood, and even wished her well. Amanda knew Tyler, and she knew that smile wasn't acceptance, but calculation. And she had no idea, and no one else knew either, how far Tyler was willing to go. Tyler was already strategizing while Amanda was telling friends about missed calls and automobiles in the dark. He wasn't the type of man to make quick, reckless actions. He was the type of person who could sit in the shadows, watching, waiting, and giving someone the impression that they were secure again before tearing the ground out from under them. Tyler believed Amanda still belonged to him, despite Amanda's decision to stop the relationship. If Tyler couldn't have her, no one else would. In the late spring of 2008, Amanda stopped answering unknown phone numbers and began receiving text messages instead. At first, they were innocuous, short, informal, even friendly, the type of generic check-ins that might have come from anybody. Hello, how have you been? Just wanted to say hello. Thinking about you. Amanda didn't know the number. She inquired around, assuming it may be a friend with a new phone, but when she responded once, just a basic, "Who is this?" she never received a straight response. Instead, the messages became warmer and more familiar. You don't have to know who I am. Just know I care about you. I've been watching from a distance. You deserve better friends. Amanda, who was attempting to move on from a terrible breakup, interpreted those words in a different light. She imagined it was someone she'd met casually, a coworker, or possibly a bashful admirer, trying to reach out without being weird. She told a close friend about it, adding, "I think it's just some guy with a crush. It's probably harmless." But it wasn't without consequences, since we knew what Amanda didn't. Tyler Grant was sending those texts. He got a prepaid phone, one of those cheap burner phones you can pick up with cash, with no paper trail and no name attached. He thought it was brilliant, and it worked for a long time. From that phone, he became Amanda's mystery friend. He customized the messages carefully. If she wrote anything online, he'd echo it. If she reported being stressed at work, he'd text her the same night. "Rough day? You deserve a break." Amanda had no idea she was being watched. Every step she made was traced back to the one guy she was desperately trying to leave behind. Tyler knew better than to push too fast. He wanted Amanda to be comfortable and intrigued, so the texts gradually began to mold her attitude. They weren't pushy or threatening, and that was what made them deadly. Her friends would later remember how she spoke about the messages with a half smile, saying it was kinda nice to have someone checking in. She wasn't falling for anybody, but she was dropping her guard, which was all Tyler needed. She peered at the door, then at the living room window, and the porch light flickered. Her pulse raced with panic and bewilderment, and she considered phoning someone, her mother, sister, a friend, but a tiny voice within whispered, "It's nothing. Maybe it's just someone who needs assistance." In that moment, she made a decision. Amanda put on her shoes, grabbed her keys, and went outside, the night air wrapping around her like a thick blanket, humid and heavy. She shut the door behind her, the clang booming across the deserted street. There was no one visible, no shadows in the yard, only the dim illumination of the streetlight and the distant buzz of a neighbor's television through an open window. Another text appeared, short and simple. "I'm right here. Don't be afraid." Amanda stepped down the front steps, trusting what she assumed to be a friend, or perhaps wanting to help someone. By the time she reached the pavement, the phone had gone dead. There was no one around, no movement, and she was gone. Back inside the house, her parents were still sleeping, and they had no idea what had happened. The next morning, when Amanda hadn't returned, the worry that had always hovered at the edges of their minds turned into something heavier, darker, and suffocating. They called her friends and retraced her steps, but every lead dissolved into uncertainty. Her parents discovered her car precisely where it had been the night before, the pocketbook, wallet, and phone undamaged. Nothing had been taken or disturbed, just a young woman who had vanished into the night without a trace. The situation was baffling, with no traces of fight, forced entry, or tracks other than Amanda's heading out of the home. The neighbors had not seen or heard anything strange, and it appeared that she had simply vanished into the Florida night. Because, while Amanda thought this was just a nameless well-wisher, Tyler was actually constructing a trap. Every night, he sat in his car, that prepaid phone blazing in his palm, contemplating his next move. To Amanda, it felt like innocent curiosity, but Tyler saw it as control. The unsettling thing is that Amanda had no idea she was being led by the same man she believed she had escaped. It was July 12, 2008, a warm, sticky night in Florida, the kind where the air feels like it's pressing against your skin, and even the cicadas seem restless. Amanda had spent the evening quietly at home, catching up on a few things after work. The house was calm, her parents asleep down the hall, and she had no reason to expect that this night would change everything. But suddenly her phone vibrated. At first, she assumed it was another of the anonymous messages she had been receiving, but as she looked at the screen, she noticed an unknown number and a brief, casual message. "Come outside. I need to see you." Amanda stopped. Her senses tugged at her. The texts had always been unusual, sometimes soothing in a twisted way, sometimes unsettling, but she had never gotten one like this, direct, urgent, and forceful. Her first reaction was caution. Perhaps it was a friend in difficulty, or someone who knew something she didn't. She peered out the window onto the dimly lighted street. The night was almost too calm, with just the odd buzz of a passing automobile breaking the silence. Still, her curiosity gnawed at her, and she considered texting back, composing, then erasing a response. "Who is this?" But the words felt heavy on her fingertips. Then, as if feeling her uncertainty, another message appeared. "Please, just a minute. I won't be long. I promise." Amanda paused. The tone had shifted, and the words now bore weight, anticipation, and an irresistible pull. In cases like this, investigators immediately look at people close to the missing person, friends, family, and yes, ex-partners. But without evidence, suspicion is only a whisper. Tyler Grant, her former boyfriend, was known to have been persistent, but at the time, there was no proof linking him to her disappearance. He even helped search that night, blending in with volunteers, holding a flashlight, asking questions, and appearing concerned. Amanda's disappearance sent shockwaves through the community. Posters went up on telephone poles and store windows. News crews showed up at the house, and the story made local headlines. Young woman missing in quiet Florida neighborhood. Everyone wondered how someone could vanish so completely, leaving behind everything she owned, like a ghost slipping through the cracks of a familiar world. Her parents stayed up all night scanning the driveway, hoping to see her car's lights turn on and her go back through the front door, but she never did. And that's the terrible part. In a neighborhood where doors are rarely secured, where neighbors greet and kids ride bikes freely, the impossible had occurred. Someone, somewhere, had stolen Amanda or induced her to leave, without leaving a single trace. Investigators investigated the region for months, looking for retention ponds, forested areas, and abandoned houses. They interrogated neighbors and acquaintances, neighbors who had walked their dogs that night, and anybody else who could have observed a movement. Tyler stayed near, present, helpful, and empathetic, but investigators eventually discovered that he was already watching the tale evolve and weaving the strands of deception that would keep him concealed in plain sight for years. Amanda's disappearance was the kind of event that changes everything, not just for the family, not just for the town, but for the way people see the world around them. A night that began with the ordinary, the hum of a fan, the glow of a television, the quiet of a summer evening, ended in terror, confusion, and a truth that no one would discover immediately. Sometimes the most dangerous people are those you think you know. Amanda Lewis plunged into the darkness that night, and her world and life would never be the same. By the next morning, the Florida sun had risen higher in the sky, bathing the neighborhood in bright, usual light. Yet, Amanda Lewis's parents felt nothing was ordinary anymore. They awoke to the usual sounds, the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower, birds calling across the yards, and the faint rumble of traffic along the nearby street. But something was wrong. Amanda's bed was untouched, her breakfast dishes were still in the cabinet, and the car, the thing that should have gone with her, was still parked neatly in the driveway. Susan, Amanda's mother, got a sinking feeling in her chest. At first, she tried to tell herself that it was nothing. Perhaps Amanda had stayed over at a friend's house or gone for an early morning run. But as the minutes passed, the bad feeling deepened. Richard, Amanda's father, stepped into her room and called her name. "Amanda? Are you awake?" There was no answer, and the house was still, the type of silence that makes your stomach flip and says, something is very wrong. They investigated every room, the backyard, the garage, and even the front porch again, but there was no message, no clue she had left on purpose. Then the realization set in. Amanda had vanished. Susan made the initial call to the local police, her voice shaking as she reported that her daughter had not returned home last night and had never missed a morning. She would not have left her car, money, or phone unattended. When the authorities came, they immediately began the typical procedure. They inquired where she was last seen, who she had been in touch with, and if she had any known enemies. Amanda's parents responded as best they could, but nothing appeared to explain the situation. Her room had no evidence of fighting, and no possessions were stolen. It was as if she had quietly left for a moment and never returned. The police on the case swiftly classified it as a missing person, but the details made it unusual. Leaving a car, wallet, keys, and phone behind is not the behavior of someone willingly disappearing, which sparked concern. Within hours, the story spread. Neighbors walked by, looking curiously at the driveway and the house. "Did you hear about Amanda?" People whispered. "She hasn't been seen since last night." The normally quiet streets became charged with unease, a tension that made every passing car, every shadow on the corner feel threatening. Meanwhile, Amanda's parents were swept into a loop of calls, meetings, and visits from investigators, who all asked the same questions. Did she have a boyfriend? Had there been any recent arguments? Was there anything strange in the days preceding up to her disappearance? Then, inevitably, came the issue that everyone was thinking about. Who would want to injure Amanda Lewis? There were no known adversaries, no recent confrontations, no issues that may have evolved into something violent. Amanda was, by all accounts, ordinary, reliable, kind, and trustworthy, but she was gone. Detectives went door to door in the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen anything suspicious the night before, such as a car parked too long, headlights flashing, strange noises, or shadows moving across lawns, but the answers were the same. Nothing. The only thing unusual was a quiet house, an empty driveway, and a family desperate for answers. Tyler Grant, Amanda's ex-boyfriend, entered the story in a way that would later be scrutinized in great detail. He arrived at the house with a flashlight in hand, claiming to want to help and do what he could. He comforted Amanda's parents, offered to join the searches, and appeared genuinely concerned in public. Tyler, who had sent the anonymous texts, had watched Amanda's movements, and had built a plan piece by piece, had already orchestrated much of what had led to this moment. Amanda, on the other hand, had no idea what was going on. Friends, neighbors, volunteers, and local law enforcement formed search parties and combed the surrounding areas. Wooded patches, nearby streets, retention ponds, and the few parks scattered around town. Dogs were brought in to pick up scents, flashlights cut through the gathering shadows, and helicopters circled overhead. But not Amanda. As the days passed, her parents began to feel the weight of not knowing. They clung to hope, hoping she had wandered somewhere, that she had been picked up by a kind stranger, that she would walk back through that front door. But as each lead came up empty, the fear began to grow. In a town where everyone thought they knew their neighbors, someone had vanished without a trace. Local news stations aired segments with Amanda's face on the screen, her warm smile contrasting with the growing tension. Flyers were distributed in grocery stores, gas stations, and along main streets. The investigators were frustrated by the lack of evidence. There were no security films of her leaving the house, no eyewitness descriptions of strange behavior, and no clear suspects. Despite the fact that the initial hours and days were vital, the trail seemed to vanish. And that's when the true terror set in. The person responsible for a disappearance isn't always a stranger lurking in the shadows. Sometimes the threat is much closer, blending in with the searchers, reassuring the family, and trying to care. Amanda's parents couldn't know that yet, because they didn't fully suspect Tyler. But in the cold logic of the investigation, Tyler's presence in her life would become an unavoidable focus. His charm, apparent concern, and willingness to help. All of this was part of a facade that kept him one step ahead of suspicion. Amanda's disappearance was not just a case. It was a wound in the heart of the town, and it was a nightmare that refused to end for those who knew her and loved her. The community held its collective breath, neighbors double-checked doors and windows, and normal life felt distant and fragile. The investigation that followed would take years. Weeks of empty searches turned into months of unanswered questions, leads would dry up, and the case would grow cold. But in those first 24 hours, in those frantic moments when parents are left alone with the reality that their child is gone, the world appears to tilt. The ordinary becomes terrifying, and the most ordinary people can hide the darkest secrets. Every day is characterized by the absence, by the unanswered question, where is she? Time has a funny way of transforming the world around a catastrophe. Days blur into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. But for the families left behind, the clock appears to stop utterly. For Amanda Lewis' parents, those years were a slow, grinding ache. They awoke that morning in 2008 to an empty house, and since then, each anniversary, holiday, and birthday has carried the weight of her absence. The neighborhood around them went on. Children grew up, neighbors moved in and out, but Amanda remained a ghost in the fabric of their lives. Susan and Richard held small vigils every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, with candles flickering on the porch, photographs laid out on the table, and friends and family gathered to remember her as she had been, a daughter, a sister, a friend. They spoke into the night, voicing hopes, fears, and the unanswerable question of why. Interviews with local media, letters to newspapers, television segments, social media campaigns, anything that could keep Amanda's story in the public eye, became a part of their lives. Please, her mother would say in front of cameras, eyes brimming with tears, if anyone knows anything, come forward. Bring my daughter home. Each appeal was a frail thread, a hope that someone somewhere had knowledge, that someone recalled anything that had fallen through the gaps all those years ago. Nevertheless, time had a harsh way of destroying even the strongest threads. Leads dried up, witnesses moved away, and memories faded. Amanda's friends, now adults with jobs and families of their own, still whispered about her. "I saw her smile every day at work," one would say. "She was always so kind, it doesn't make sense." But as the years passed, their memories became distant, like reflections seen through a fogged window. The town, too, adapted. News stories faded from front pages. Neighbors stopped knocking on doors asking for updates. The quiet streets returned to their usual rhythms, with children playing, cars passing, and the ordinary hum of life moving forward. However, in the Lewis household, the ordinary had been stolen. The clatter of breakfast dishes, the slam of car doors, the laughter of family gathered on a weekend, were haunted by her absence. Amanda's parents couldn't bring themselves to clean her room, fearing that any change would erase the last tangible traces of her presence. Clothes hung neatly folded in the closet, as if waiting for her to return. Her bed was made, books stacked on the nightstand, and even small personal items, photo frames, knickknacks, journals she had once scribbled in, remained as they were on the day she disappeared. The first year was torture. The second was a steady decline into the irritating numbing of unresolved questions, and by the third and fourth years, the hope that Amanda would return home alive began to blend with a dull, constant fear that they would never see her again. Despite this, Susan and Richard persisted, attending every community event where they could raise awareness about her disappearance, speaking at schools, neighborhood groups, and anywhere they thought someone might remember something. Flyers were updated each year, her face freshened with the passage of time, and they refused to let her name fade away. Every time a reporter asked for a statement, every time a camera rolled, Susan and Richard forced themselves to speak, even if their voices trembled. "Amanda isn't just a statistic," they would say. "She's our daughter. She's someone who mattered. She's someone we will never stop searching for." Amanda's disappearance became a cautionary tale in the town, and even casual acquaintances seemed to carry the shadow of her disappearance, a subtle reminder that life can change in a single moment, that someone can vanish without warning, leaving nothing but questions behind. Parents talked to their children about safety, and friends checked in more frequently. Every birthday, Christmas, and summer anniversary served as a reminder of what had been lost, and the quiet accumulation of time only exacerbated the family's grief. Every plea, televised interview, poster, and social media post became a marker of the passing years, a chronicle of waiting in the dark. Throughout it all, Amanda remained absent. The town's initial shock had long faded, replaced by the uneasy awareness that some mysteries persist far longer than anyone expects. Some disappearances become footnotes in the lives of the community, stories whispered rather than confronted. But for Amanda's family, the case never became a footnote. It remained a living, aching presence, an unhealed wound. Neighbors remembered the vigils, the tears, and the quiet determination of a family that refused to give up. They spoke of the posters in store windows, the updated flyers on utility poles each year, and the tireless energy spent reminding everyone that Amanda Lewis had vanished without a trace. And although the world moved on, the Lewis family's hope, however beaten and tattered, never fully faded. They prayed, remembered, and continued to search. Each unanswered inquiry, each day without news, just increased their determination. Amanda's narrative, locked in that one July night in 2008, became a disturbing reminder that sometimes the hardest fights are waged against time and quiet. Despite years of no leads, the family's determination remained unwavering, because hope, even in its quietest form, is difficult to destroy. Since that hot July night in 2008, the case of Amanda Lewis had gone cold in the eyes of most. But cold cases never truly die. They linger, like shadows in the corners of memory, waiting for the right moment to surface. For Amanda's family, hope had never fully faded, even as each year brought disappointment, frustration, and the slow gnaw of helplessness. During one of those peaceful periods, when most of the community had practically forgotten, detectives decided to take another look. Not a hurried reinvestigation, but a meticulous rereading of records, messages, and notes, looking for anything that had been overlooked the first time. Among the stacks of old case files, phone records, and scattered witness statements, something subtle began to emerge. An anonymous phone number, which had sent Amanda those strange, luring texts in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. At first, the investigators didn't know what to make of it. The number had never been traced before. Prepaid phones, no names attached, no billing records. It was the type of thing that vanished into the ether, frustrating to track. But technology had advanced, databases had improved, and now it was possible to dig a little deeper. And they dug. It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. Tyler Grant, the man who had stood behind Amanda's parents throughout the frantic searches, the man who had smiled and given compassion, the man everyone assumed was just a worried ex. Tyler had been sending those texts all along, orchestrating a pattern of subtle intimidation and control, masking obsession with feigned care. Everything they had overlooked, every unexplained call, every vanishing presence outside Amanda's home, pointed back to him. When Tyler was brought in for questioning, the atmosphere in the room was heavy, dense with anxiety. At first, he performed the role of the cooperative, concerned citizen, calm, cool, courteous, offering explanations, slight smirks, and laughter that didn't quite reach his eyes. But as the inquiry progressed, cracks began to appear, little errors, tiny misalignments in his timeline, pauses when specifics were explored. The serene attitude faltered just slightly, as if a mask was unraveling. Tyler responded, sometimes too quickly, sometimes hesitantly, anticipating what the interrogators wanted to hear about his relationship with Amanda, the breakup, and the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Detectives knew that suspicion alone wasn't enough, so they pressed him carefully. "I don't know what you're talking about," he remarked at one point, his voice measured and somewhat choreographed. "I was there to help. I wanted to see her safe." But investigators had the phone records, and they had proof that those texts, the ones that drew Amanda out that fateful night, were coming from Tyler. Every message, every digital breadcrumb, was firmly linked to Tyler. Still, a vital element was missing: no corpse, no tangible proof of a crime. Amanda's disappearance meant that nothing could be established other than the pattern of harassment and the troubling relationship between Tyler and the anonymous texts. Tyler knew he was in a gray zone in the interrogation room because there was no body, no proof of death or violence, and he began to play it. He used small gestures, feigned confusion, rehearsed sympathy, and carefully chosen words to stay just beyond the reach of the law. Despite this, investigators could see the cracks emerging in Tyler's story. A wince here, a pause there, a conflicting comment that didn't match the records. Every discrepancy moved Tyler closer to being exposed, even if it wasn't immediate. For the family, the discovery of the phone records was a mix of relief and renewed anguish. Relief that someone was finally being investigated, that a tangible lead existed after so many years, and anguish because it confirmed what they had always suspected, that Amanda's disappearance was not a random tragedy or accident, but the deliberate act of someone they had once trusted to some extent, someone who had hidden in plain sight. Tyler's name was quietly circulated among detectives in the months following the revelation, and the case took on a new life. However, the absence of a body continued to stall the path toward prosecution, and charges of murder or abduction were difficult, if not impossible, to pursue. The investigation became a careful balancing act, building a case, applying pressure, watching Tyler's every move, and so on. Tyler, for his part, appeared to be aware of the scrutiny. Friends who knew him later described subtle changes in his behavior during this period. A little more withdrawn, a little more careful about what he said publicly, a little more rehearsed in his interactions. But publicly, he continued to present the same facade of concern, calm demeanor, and helpful presence that had kept suspicion at bay for so long. It was a sobering reminder that someone capable of such determined fixation might be so discreet, gliding through the lives of people, looking innocent while secretly arranging events. Tyler's relationship to the anonymous texts was unmistakable, leaving a digital trail that could not be ignored. Records were cross-referenced, phone records were examined, and connections that had been hidden for years were suddenly evident. And yet, without Amanda's body, every statement, every admission, every crack in his story remained a puzzle piece that couldn't yet complete the picture. Investigators could see the outline of the truth, but the final confirmation, the one that would seal the case, was still out of reach. Amanda's disappearance cast a shadow over every interrogation, record review, and cautious step detectives took, and as years of inactivity gave way to a renewed focus, it became clear that the past, long buried beneath layers of uncertainty, was beginning to speak again. Tyler Grant had been hiding behind a facade of charm and innocence for over a decade, but the evidence, patient and relentless, was beginning to tear it away. Every message he sent, every lie he said, and every wrong action he took brought him closer to being exposed. And the family, still waiting, praying, and hoping, realized that the tale they had feared for years, that Amanda would never be found, was no longer utterly beyond of grasp. But the last proof, the piece that would change suspicion into conviction, was still lacking. There was no corpse, no direct evidence, only tension, unanswered questions, and the gradual, inexorable breakdown of Tyler's carefully crafted facade. 9 years had passed since that sweltering July night in 2008. 9 years of unanswered questions, of anniversaries marked by grief, of hopes rising and falling with each new lead that ultimately led nowhere. Amanda Lewis had become a ghost in the memories of those who loved her, a name whispered with quiet pain, a face frozen in photographs that grew increasingly out of date as time marched on. Amanda's parents, Susan and Richard, clung to hope like a lifeline, but every day without answers deepened the ache in their hearts. Despite the fact that the town had changed, the absence of one young woman left a void that would never fully heal. The quiet was finally broken in 2017, over a decade after her disappearance. A local maintenance worker was checking a retention pond at the edge of a residential development on an ordinary afternoon. It appeared to be routine work, but as he navigated the shallow, murky water, something caught his eye, a disturbance beneath the surface. At first, he thought it might be debris, a fallen branch, something natural, but the shape didn't fit. It was too distinct, too human. Divers were deployed within hours, revealing what had long been suspected but never confirmed: Amanda Lewis remains. For Amanda's family, the discovery was a surreal collision of relief and horror. Relief because, after 9 years, there was finally proof, undeniable and concrete, that Amanda's fate was known. Horror because the reality of it, that their daughter had been gone, that her life had been violently cut short, was now starkly, painfully true. The scene at the retention pond was controlled but tense. Police cordoned off the area, forensic teams worked carefully, and detectives documented every detail. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that makes every movement feel sluggish, oppressive, almost suffocating. Even in the midst of a methodical investigation, the atmosphere was heavy, laden with the weight of years of unanswered questions and unspoken fears. Forensic experts began the painstaking process of identification. DNA testing, cross-referencing medical records, and other forensic techniques would confirm what the world already suspected. Amanda, the missing daughter whose disappearance had haunted a family and a town, had finally been found. Susan collapsed to her knees, unable to speak, her hands trembling as she clutched photographs of her daughter. Richard stood silently, his face etched with grief, jaw tight, eyes hollowed from years of sleepless nights and relentless worry. Friends and relatives who had prayed for years and lived in the constant shadow of uncertainty were overcome with tears and disbelief. The discovery of Amanda's remains was a watershed moment for the investigators, as it allowed them to move beyond suspicion and into concrete evidence. Every detail, including the body's condition, location in the retention pond, and surroundings, would be crucial in reconstructing her final moments. Even as the forensic teams worked, the emotional toll on the family remained paramount. 9 years of hope and fear, of holidays spent quietly, of birthdays remembered in whispers, of anniversaries marked with vigils. All of this had led to this moment, and while justice had not yet been served, there was a fragile but undeniable sense of closure beginning to take shape. Amanda's story, long a symbol of unresolved tragedy, had finally reached a point where the reality could no longer be ignored. News of the discovery spread quickly, affecting neighbors, friends, and even casual acquaintances who had been following the story for years. Social media posts, memorials, and quiet conversations reflected the shared shock and grief. Tyler Grant, whose presence had always hovered in the background of Amanda's disappearance, now became the central figure in the search for accountability. However, the discovery did not provide immediate answers about who had done this or how. The question of responsibility loomed large, and long-dormant suspicion was sharper and more focused. For the Lewis family, the discovery was bittersweet. The joy of knowing where their daughter had been was inextricably linked to the anguish of understanding what had happened to her. Every detail reported by the forensic teams, the location of the body, the evidence of restraint, the signs of foul play, confirmed the family's silent fears for nearly a decade. The quiet weight of years spent wondering, pleading, hoping, and fearing was finally intersecting with tangible reality. There would be no more what-ifs in terms of her location, and the focus could now shift to justice, accountability, and finally naming the person who had orchestrated this tragedy from the shadows. Even in this moment, the gravity of the situation could not be ignored. Recovery of remains, no matter how careful the process, carries a visceral reminder of the human life lost. Investigators noted the environment of the pond, the preservation of certain elements, and the evidence of attempts to conceal. Each observation told a part of the story, but the full truth, why, how, and by whom, would require patience, careful examination, and relentless pursuit. The discovery in 2017 marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. For the Lewis family, it was the first step toward a deeper sense of closure, a confirmation that their daughter had not simply vanished into thin air. For the town, it was a stark reminder that danger can lurk quietly, unnoticed, even in familiar places. For the larger story, it was the turning point that would lead investigators directly to Tyler Grant, whose secrets had remained hidden. After years of waiting, suffering, and unanswered questions, this moment, tinged with sadness but tinged with hope, set the stage for the final unraveling of the truth. The evidence was now tangible and undeniable in the real world, and with it, the possibility of accountability and justice was finally within reach. By 2017, the discovery of Amanda Lewis's remains in the retention pond had transformed the case from cold files and unanswered questions to something tangible, something real. The forensic team meticulously documented every detail, clue, and small piece of evidence that could shed light on the final hours of her life, and what they discovered was both harrowing and conclusive. Amanda's body, though long submerged, still held enough evidence to confirm her identity, and DNA testing left no room for doubt. This was Amanda Lewis, the young woman who had vanished in 2008, leaving behind nothing but questions and grief. Her family, after nearly a decade of uncertainty, finally knew with absolute certainty that their daughter's fate had been sealed that night years ago. The forensics also revealed the violent circumstances of her death. Duct tape was discovered, used in a way that indicated restraint, confirming what investigators had long suspected. Amanda had been forcibly taken and silenced. The medical examiner determined the cause of death, piecing together signs of trauma that corroborated the family's long-held fears. Tyler Grant could no longer hide behind charm, alibis, or feigned concern. Investigators discovered small but telling details linking him to the crime scene and Amanda's final moments, all of which painted a picture of premeditation, obsession, and control. When detectives confronted him with the forensic evidence, the mask of calm that had shielded him for nearly a decade began to crack. At first, he attempted the familiar routine: confusion, partial denials, shifting explanations. However, the weight of concrete evidence was unlike anything he had faced before. DNA, physical traces, and investigators' meticulous record-keeping all pointed directly at him. Tyler's stance moved, the prepared serenity disappeared, his sentences stuttered, his voice rose and fell with anxious energy, and every detail the investigators lay forth chipped away at his composure until he crumbled. The confession was not immediate, clean, or simple. It came in fragments, a patchwork of admissions that, piece by piece, aligned with long-standing suspicions about him. He described aspects of the night, avoiding the most damning elements at first, but the forensic evidence left him with no room to hide. Each new detail discovered by investigators was a nail in the coffin of his deception. For the Lewis family, hearing Tyler's confession was a bittersweet moment. Years of fear, uncertainty, and grief finally converged into truth. The realization of what had been done to Amanda was excruciating, but the acknowledgement of responsibility brought a measure of closure they had been denied for so long. Their daughter's story could now be told fully, her name cleared of ambiguity, her life remembered, even as the darkness of her death remained. In 2018, the trial was held in a courtroom packed with journalists, friends, neighbors, and members of the Lewis family. The prosecution's case was based on testimony, forensic reports, and Tyler's own admissions. Each piece of evidence was presented methodically, leaving no room for doubt in the jury's minds. Witnesses recounted Amanda's last known sightings, the harrowing pattern of harassment, and the subtle threats she had faced. Forensic experts explained how DNA, duct tape residue, and other evidence conclusively linked Tyler to Amanda's death. Even seemingly minor details, the anonymous texts, the patterns of control and obsession, were shown to form a complete, chilling narrative of premeditation. Tyler's defense attempted to downplay the connections, questioning timelines, motivations, and interpretations of the forensic data, but with each counterpoint, the prosecution reinforced the strength of the evidence. The narrative was clear. A young woman had been stalked, lured, and eventually killed by someone who had once been close to her. The jury saw the full scope of the crime unfold, piece by piece, unable to ignore the convergence of digital evidence, physical evidence. The Lewis family's presence in the courtroom was both a memorial to Amanda and a quiet affirmation that her life and narrative mattered. Despite the emotional and tense nature of the trial, they stayed faithful. Tyler Grant was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life without parole, the most severe penalty available short of death. After nearly a decade, justice was finally done. While sadness persisted, the lengthy shadow of doubt was lifted. Amanda's parents felt a profound, hard-won sense of closure after learning that the man responsible for the deliberate brutality that had stolen their daughter from them would never be free again. Amanda Lewis' story, while heartbreaking, also served as a testament to perseverance, the relentless pursuit of truth, and the unwavering dedication of those who refuse to forget. The case served as a sobering reminder to the community that predators frequently hide in plain sight, that charm can mask danger, and that vigilance can mean the difference between safety and tragedy. Friends and neighbors reflected on the courage it took to endure years of uncertainty, as well as the importance of speaking out, watching, and remembering, as the Lewis family began the slow process of healing. Vigils became memorials, flyers were retired, and tributes to Amanda's memory took their place. Ultimately, the case of Amanda Lewis demonstrated both the darkness of human obsession and the enduring power of justice. Years of unanswered questions had finally led to accountability, proving that even the most calculated attempts to conceal the truth can be discovered, and that truth, once revealed, has the power to bring closure, if not peace, to those left behind. Tyler Grant was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a grim but welcome affirmation that justice had been served after nearly a decade. Susan and Richard Lewis described the moment as surreal, a mix of relief, heartbreak, grief, and some closure. Susan rose to deliver the family's impact statement, her voice steady but raw, carrying the weight of years spent in uncertainty and fear. "Our daughter was taken from us," she began, eyes glistening. 9 years we lived in the shadow of not knowing, each day haunted by questions, each night filled with fear. We cannot bring her back, but today we finally know the truth. Today there is justice, and while that does not erase the pain, it reminds us that her life mattered. Richard added a few words, his tone quiet but firm, a reflection of the deep, abiding grief that had become a constant companion. "We have spent years waiting, searching, pleading. The world may have moved on, but we have carried Amanda with us every step of the way. Today, while the darkness is not gone, the truth shines through, and that is something we hold on to. That is something we keep alive." The trial and verdict provided the family with some relief, a fragile sense of closure that allowed them to finally begin untangling the emotional weight they had carried for years. However, closure is never absolute, and the void left by Amanda's absence remained, a reminder that no verdict or confession can fully heal a wound like this. Outside the courtroom, the community watched with a mixture of reflection and sober awareness. Friends, neighbors, and even casual observers felt the weight of what had happened. Amanda's story, once a cautionary tale whispered in local circles, was now fully exposed, a chilling demonstration of how someone seemingly ordinary can harbor extraordinary danger. Tyler Grant had been a figure of charm, a familiar presence, someone trusted enough to be close to the family and the investigation itself, and it was precisely that proximity, that unassuming facade, that allowed his actions to go unnoticed for so long. The Amanda Lewis case taught detectives, true crime enthusiasts, and community members that predators can operate quietly, methodically, and often in plain sight, camouflaged by normalcy. It also reminded everyone that vigilance is essential, that missing person stories are rarely as simple as they first appear, and that persistence, both by families and the story, sparked discussions about trust, awareness, and the subtle signs of obsession and control that frequently precede tragic outcomes, and it became a template for comprehending how hidden threats. Amanda's parents, despite their grief, found solace in their daughter's memory, choosing to honor her life rather than dwell solely on the tragic circumstances of her death. Her room, once a frozen tableau of absence, became a place of quiet remembrance. Photographs, mementos, and personal items were carefully preserved, ensuring that Amanda's presence remained tangible in their lives even as the world moved on. In the quiet moments after the trial, Susan and Richard often reflected on the long journey from uncertainty to justice. They remembered the early days, the frantic calls to police, the endless searches, the public pleas that had often seemed fruitless. They remembered the nights spent hoping, praying, fearing, and wondering if they would ever see their daughter again. And they acknowledged that, while justice had been served, the memory of Amanda's life and the time lost would. Tyler Grant exploited familiarity and proximity, demonstrating a calculated patience that made the eventual revelation both shocking and instructive. The case also served as a stark reminder of the fragility of safety, reminding communities, families, and individuals that trust must be balanced with vigilance, that appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the most dangerous people are those we know best. As Amanda Lewis's story came to a close, the world was left with a haunting thought. The shadows that linger are not always distant or abstract. They can be close, hidden within the ordinary, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Awareness, persistence, and courage, qualities exemplified by Amanda's family and the investigators, were essential in bringing light to the darkness. In 2008, Amanda was not the only young woman whose life had been threatened, the only story that might have hidden connections, or the only case where suspicion lingered quietly in the shadows. However, the conclusion of Tyler Grant's case, while definitive in the legal sense, left a subtle unease in the air. Tyler wasn't the only ex-boyfriend under suspicion in 2008. There was a sense that the patterns seen in Amanda's case, obsession, control, and predation, were not unique, and that the lessons learned here could and should inform the understanding of future cases. The words, quiet and deliberate, teased the possibility of other stories, other victims, and other secrets yet to be uncovered, leaving the audience with an open loop, a subtle tension that lingered even after the story appeared resolved. As the video ended, viewers were asked to consider the gravity of the situation, the perseverance of those seeking justice, and the lingering presence of danger that lurks behind everyday life. Amanda Lewis' tragic story became both a cautionary tale and a testament to the enduring power of truth and justice. Even when it appears that darkness has won, determination and truth have the power to illuminate, expose, and, ultimately, bring justice. Through grief, persistence, and the tireless efforts of family and investigators, the case reached a conclusion that honored Amanda's memory while also serving as a warning. Predators can hide in plain sight, and time does not erase responsibility. The courtroom, the family's tearful statements, the retention pond where the story had been resolved, and the haunting suggestion of other unseen dangers left viewers with a mix of closure and suspense, grief and anticipation, and the understanding that while this chapter had ended, the lessons of Amanda Lewis's story would continue to ring true. Amanda's story, as frightening as it is far from unique. Across America, countless cases like hers, disappearances, hidden obsessions, predators hiding in plain sight, remain unresolved, forgotten, or never fully understood. While we found justice for Amanda, hers is just one of many that deserve to be told. By subscribing to this channel, you're not just following one story. You're helping to ensure that voices like Amanda's are heard, that other victims aren't forgotten, and that the truth, no matter how dark, reaches those who need to know. Every like, share, and subscription allows more stories like this to be discovered and remembered. Remember, Tyler Grant wasn't the only ex-boyfriend under suspicion in 2008. There are others hiding in the quiet corners of towns across the country whose stories are waiting to be told. Stay tuned, because the next story could be just around the corner, and it's closer than you think.